After my ankle surgery, my son drove me toward a recovery center on a freezing, stormy night. But he pulled off onto an abandoned mountain road, dragged me out of the truck, and threw my crutches straight into a flooded ditch. "Nobody is coming for you, old man," he said. My daughter-in-law smiled and added, "You're never going home." They left me there to die. 2 days later, when they pushed open their front door, they froze in their tracks. I was already sitting inside waiting for them. Welcome to the Silent Revenge channel. I am so grateful you could join me tonight. Before we dive into the final outcome, I would love to know where you are watching from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. Please note, this story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and educational purposes, and any resemblance to actual events is purely coincidental. But the life lessons inside it are deeply real and practical. I need to tell you exactly where I was on the night my world completely broke apart. When I say broke apart, I mean like old timber snapping instantly after years of rot. No warning, nothing left to hold it together. I wasn't in a hospital bed or a warm house. I was face down on a mountain road in a pouring rainstorm. 71 years old, 3 weeks out of surgery, both crutches gone, completely unable to stand. Let me step back for a moment and explain something. Because this matters more than almost anything else, I will share tonight. 6 weeks before that night, I was in a car accident. Nothing dramatic about it. A wet road, a turn I had driven 100 times, and a pickup truck that took the corner too wide. My left ankle took the brunt of it. The surgeon used the word shattered, and he wasn't being poetic. 4 titanium screws, a plate, and very clear recovery orders. 0 weight on that foot. Not a little weight. None. Without crutches, I couldn't stand, let alone walk a single step. That wasn't an old man exaggerating. It was my exact medical reality. And Caleb knew it. My son knew it better than anyone, because he spent 3 weeks in that house, watching me navigate a 12-foot hallway like I was walking on the moon. He knew precisely what those crutches meant to me, which is why, when he reached into the back of his truck and threw them into the drainage ditch beside that mountain road, he knew exactly what he was doing. The rain was coming down in sheets, pouring like a waterfall. It wasn't the kind of gentle rain that makes you think of autumn. It hit you hard, soaking through your collar in 30 seconds and turning the dirt shoulder into a raging stream. I heard the rushing water in that ditch before I ever heard the hollow splash of the crutches hitting it. 2 hollow splashes, one right after the other, and then nothing. Caleb walked around the front of the truck and stood over me. 42 years old, built heavy. The kind of man who moved through life fully convinced the world owed him something substantial. That night, that belief was written all over his face. "This is it, old man," he said. His voice was flat, almost bored. End of the line. My back was pressed against the wet side of his truck, the only thing keeping me upright. I looked at my son, my boy, the kid I taught to throw a baseball in the backyard on Clement Street. I said, "Caleb, don't do this." He tilted his head like I had said something faintly amusing. "We've been going through this for months, Dad. Tonight, it finally ends." "I'll freeze out here," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt inside. "You know that. That's not my problem anymore." He reached out and pulled my hand off the door handle. The moment I lost my support, my left leg buckled. A flare of agony shot up from my ankle, turning the edges of my vision white. I grabbed the side mirror with everything I had, barely staying on my feet. Through the rain-streaked passenger window, I heard Jolene's voice. Caleb's wife, my daughter-in-law. Caleb. She just called his name. But her tone wasn't a warning. It was a prompt. Like a director telling an actor to move the scene along. Caleb leaned in close, so close I could see the water running down his forehead. He spoke calmly and deliberately, letting every word land with full weight. Nobody is going. To miss you, he said. Nobody is coming. Not tonight, not ever. My chest tightened. It wasn't the cold. It was looking into his eyes while he said it, and finding nothing I recognized. No anger, no guilt, not even contempt, just calculation. He had done the math, and this was his answer. The passenger window rolled down, and Jolene leaned over. Her voice was steady and unhurried, like a woman wrapping up a business call. Don't count on anyone coming for you, she said, icy calm. No one is. The window rolled back up. Caleb walked around to the driver's side without looking back. The engine started, and the truck pulled away. I watched the red taillights blur in the rain, round the curve, and disappear. Then there was nothing. Nothing except the sound of the rain, the rushing water in the ditch, and my own breathing, faster than it should have been. I want to tell you what that moment actually felt like, because people tend to picture these things wrong. They imagine panic, shouting into the dark, or desperate thrashing around. The truth is, standing on that mountainside with nothing to hold on to, the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was something quieter, a cold certainty that pierced right through me. I knew with absolute clarity that my son had planned this. Not on a whim that night, not on the drive over. He had planned it the way a man plans a home renovation or a business trip, methodically, patiently, in detail. The road was remote. The weather gave him perfect cover, and he knew I couldn't walk. He had accounted for every variable. Standing in that freezing rain, I finally understood that Jolene was the brain behind the math, and Caleb was the one willing to carry it out. Fear showed up about 90 seconds later, right on schedule. 71 years old, 3 weeks out of reconstructive ankle surgery, stranded on a stormy mountain road with no crutches, no phone signal, and no idea where the nearest light was. The temperature was dropping fast. My jacket was soaked through. I could feel the chill seeping into my hands, inches at a time. I lowered myself down to the asphalt, wincing as I reached into the ditch to feel for my crutches. The current had already swept them away. I stretched my arm out until my shoulder screamed, but my fingers found only rushing water and gravel. I watched the darkness swallow them whole. I lay on that wet road for a moment, doing the math in my head the way a man does when he's backed into a corner. How long before hypothermia became a real issue? How long could an ankle that was already screaming from the past 10 minutes of strain endure? Into the rain. How many cars would drive down a road like this, in weather like this, at this hour? The numbers were terrible. So I did what a man does when faced with terrible odds, but a complete refusal to give up. I started moving. You can't understand how a 71-year-old man else ends up crawling down a mountain road, unless you know where he came from. So stay with me, because this part matters. My name is Russell Mercer. Most people who have known me longer than a week call me Russ. I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky, back in 1954. Second of 4 boys. 1 bathroom in the house, a TV that got 3 channels if the weather was good, and a father who considered complaining a character flaw. It wasn't a soft childhood, but it was honest, and I never spent a day feeling sorry for myself because of it. In 1972, at 18, I enlisted in the United States Army. I want to make one thing clear here, because it matters for what comes later. I don't want you sitting there painting into something I'm not. I was no hero. I didn't come home with a chest full of ribbons. I wasn't special forces, an elite operative, or the kind of soldier they make movies about. I was just a regular private doing my job, following orders, and trying to keep everyone alive, including myself. I served my time, and I came home in one piece. Coming home in one piece was a gift that some of the guys standing next to me never got, and I never took that for granted. But those years in uniform gave me something that proved far more valuable than my 18-year-old self could ever realize. It gave me a commanding officer named Dwight Hatchett. Everyone who served under him called him Hatch. I want you to remember that name, Hatch. Keep it in the back of your mind, because he comes back into this story. And when he does, you need to know who he is. I got out in 1976 and looked for work the way any young man did after taking off the uniform, a little lost, uncertain, acting more on impulse than a real plan. I drifted into land, surveying almost by accident, joining a crew mapping property lines in eastern Tennessee, and it turned out I was good at it. I was good at the physical demands. The walking, carrying gear, working through long days regardless of the weather. And I was good at the precision. A boundary line is either right or wrong. There is no close enough in surveying, and that fit the way my mind worked. Over the next 40 years, I walked just about every type of terrain that part of the country had to offer. Hillsides so steep you had to hold onto tree roots so you wouldn't slide down. River bottoms that cooked you inside your boots in July. And ridges where the February wind blew like it had a personal vendetta against you. Year after year, my knees took the brunt of it without complaint, until they finally protested all at once. But that's another story. It was during those early working years that I met Lorraine. She was Lorraine Page then, 24 years old, and working as a receptionist at a civil engineering firm in Knoxville. She had a quiet, clear-headed way of looking at things that I realized immediately was something I lacked and desperately needed. I asked her out for dinner less than a week after meeting her. She made me ask twice before she said yes. Later, I realized that was just her way of setting the rules from the start. Things were going to move at her pace, not mine. We married in the spring of 1980. I was 26. She was 25, and we spent 41 years together. Here is what I will say about those 41 years. They were ordinary years. I don't mean that as a slight. I mean it as the highest compliment. That kind of ordinary means coming home every night to the same person. Someone who is genuinely glad you're there, while you're just as glad to be there too. I've known people with fiery, dramatic marriages full of high passions and grand gestures, and I've known people like me who had 40 years of quiet, steady happiness. I know which one I'd pick every single time. Lorraine made me a far better man than I would have been on my own. She always knew when I was digging my heels in over something I should let go. She remembered the names of my crew members' wives and kids. When I came home exhausted and cranky after a long job, she would hand me a cup of coffee and say, "Go sit on the porch for 10 minutes before you talk to me." And she was right every single time. Caleb was born in 1983. I was 29. I still remember the exact weight of him when they first placed him in my arms. 6 pounds, 9 ounces. I remember standing in the delivery room in my work clothes, fresh off a job site, thinking I had no idea what I was doing, but I needed to figure it out fast. I coached his little league teams. I taught him to drive on the back roads outside town, sitting in the passenger seat with my hand braced on the dashboard, trying not to yell every time he misjudged a turn. I wasn't a perfect father. I worked long hours, and sometimes my stubbornness made things harder than they needed to be. But I was there. Every single day, I was there. I believed, and still believe, that showing up counts for something. At some point, though, Caleb started wanting things I couldn't give him, things I wouldn't have given him, even if I could. Not just material items, but a lifestyle. A big house in the right neighborhood, expensive cars, and reservations at high-end restaurants. He wanted it all right then, without putting in the 20 years of hard work that usually sits between a man and those things. Russ, Lorraine used to shake her head in the quiet kitchen and say, "Russ, that boy is going to run into a wall someday. So he's chasing things he can't even name." I told her she was being too hard on him. I was wrong about that. Then Lorraine got sick. I won't dwell on this part because it belonged entirely to her. And she was a private woman who wouldn't want her illness turned into a spectacle. I'll just tell you this. From the day of the diagnosis to the day I stood at her gravesite was 8 months. For every single one of those 8 months, she was the bravest person in the room. 66 years old, facing something terrible with the same quiet, clear, steady strength she brought to every challenge in our 41 years of marriage. After she was gone, the house felt like a place I was only borrowing. Her thumbprints were on everything. Her handwriting on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer, her books lined up in her specific order, her scent fading slowly but steadily from the bedroom. No matter how many times I told myself not to dwell on it, that empty house wore on me. 70 years old, living alone for the first time in my adult life, trying to figure out how a man moves forward when the person who always knew the next step is gone. I told myself I would find my footing. Grief passes, and a man gets back up. I believed that, right up until a Tuesday morning in early, when Caleb pulled into my driveway with a look on his face. I didn't know how to read yet, telling me he had a plan. That was 1 week after the surgeon put 4 screws into my left ankle. It was the first time Caleb pulled up in his truck with that look on his face. I was sitting in the recliner by the front window, the only place I could elevate my foot the way the doctor insisted. I heard the engine, leaned over, and watched him get out. The look I'm talking about was this: the face of a man who had already made a decision and was showing up simply to notify you. Not to ask, to notify. I didn't read it correctly at the time, and I'll admit that, honestly. He unlocked the front door using the spare key I had given him years ago. The first thing he did was stand in the doorway and scan the room, looking around like a contractor assessing a job before giving an estimate, slow, calculating, taking mental inventory. "Dad," he said, his voice dripping with concern, "you look terrible." "I had surgery a week ago," I said. "I'm not supposed to look like I just came back from a fishing trip." He walked across the room, kneeled down in front of my chair, and put a hand on my arm. His expression softened into something I hadn't seen in a long time. "You can't live here alone," he said. "Not like this. It isn't safe." As God is my witness, when he said that, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Because ever since Lorraine passed, that house had been far too quiet. The kind of silence that presses in on you, growing louder the longer you sit in it. And now my son was kneeling in front of me, hand on my arm, telling me he was worried. "I can manage," I said, though my voice sounded thin even to me. "No, you can't." Caleb insisted. Dad, without those crutches, you can't even make it to the bathroom by yourself. What if you fall? What if something happens at 2 in the morning and no one is here? His jaw set. I can't sleep at night knowing you're here all by yourself. Before I could answer, the front door opened again. A woman walked in carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil, bringing the scent of chicken and rosemary with her. That warm, homemade smell triggered a sudden wave of comfort deep in my chest because Lorraine used to make chicken casserole on Sunday nights. Same smell, same foil. It was Jolene, Caleb's wife. My daughter-in-law of 6 years, a dark-haired woman who could deploy a warm smile as efficiently as opening an umbrella at the exact right moment. She set the dish on the kitchen counter, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and walked into the living room. She bent down, kissed my cheek, and said, "Dad, we've been so worried about you. You should have called us sooner." "I didn't want to be a burden," I said. She tutted softly. "Family is never a burden." She straightened up and looked at Caleb. They exchanged a look, fast, almost imperceptible. Then she smiled down at me again. "We want you to come stay with us while you recover. Your room is already set up." I looked at the two of them standing in my living room. My son, who drove 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning out of concern for me, and my daughter-in-law, who brought me a hot meal. I thought, this is what family does when you need them. I truly believed that. "I appreciate it," I said. "But this is my home. I'd rather recover here if I can." Caleb nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated that answer. "Then we'll come here," he said. "We'll move in with you until you're back on your feet." 3 days later, they arrived with 2 truckloads of boxes. Jolene set up the guest room with impressive speed and efficiency, a thoroughness that only comes from careful advance planning. She had a system for everything. Which closet held extra linens? Which drawer in the kitchen was hers? She moved through my house with complete confidence, as if she were following a map she had already drawn in her head. On the 4th night, after dinner, Caleb sat across from me at the kitchen table and slid a piece of paper over. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a standard form," he said, leaning his elbows on the table in a relaxed, casual posture, like we were discussing routine chores. "A power of attorney. It lets me handle things for you while you're off your feet. Paying bills, managing accounts, dealing with insurance, so you don't have to stress about it while you heal." I picked it up. It was 2 pages of dense legal language, blurred around the edges because I didn't have my reading glasses on. "Should I have a lawyer look at this?" I asked. Caleb gave a light, warm chuckle. "Dad, it's a standard form. Nothing complicated. It just means if you're not mobile, I can take care of house or account matters on your behalf. That's all." My hand was a little unsteady as I reached for the pen. Not out of suspicion, but because of the pain medication they had me on. It made everything feel slightly disconnected, like I was watching myself from across the room. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read it line by line. Why would I? He was my son, and I was a tired old man sitting in a kitchen that still smelled like Lorraine's cooking. Just grateful I wasn't alone. When I put the pen down, I had no idea I had just handed Caleb the keys to everything I had built over 40 years. Nor did I know that paper wouldn't be the last document bearing my signature that I never got to see. I know that now. But that night, all I knew was that I was glad to have him there. The changes started small. Small enough that for the first week or 2, I told myself I was just adjusting. I told myself I had lived alone too long and forgot how to share space. or that the heavy feeling in my chest on certain mornings was just grief working through me, in its slow, unpredictable way. Until one morning, I pulled out my front door key and found it wouldn't fit into the lock. I stood in the foyer on my crutches, turning the key over in my fingers as if I had brought the wrong one by mistake. I tried again. The lock wouldn't budge. Caleb came down the stairs holding a coffee mug, casually mentioning, "Oh, right. We had the locks changed last week. Upgraded the security system. Hold on." He set his mug on the hall table, dug into his pocket, and handed me a new key. Bright silver, freshly cut. My hand closed around it before my brain could fully process the uncomfortable feeling rising inside me. "You changed the locks on my house," I said, without telling me. "I meant to," he said smoothly, taking another sip of coffee. "Those old locks were easy to pick." I looked into it. "Just wanted peace of mind, Dad. It's my house, Caleb. Which is exactly why I want to make sure it's secure," he replied, sounding so reasonable that I stood there with the new key in my hand, unable to find a counter-argument. He headed toward the kitchen. "Breakfast," he called back. "Jolene got the good bacon." I squeezed that key so tightly, the edges dug into my palm. I forced myself to take a deep breath, telling myself, "It's just a lock. Just a lock." There was a reasonable explanation for everything, and I was a man who always believed in reasonable explanations. That's what I told myself that morning. But my gut, that part of me Lorraine used to call the truth teller, was telling me something completely different. The mail changed the week after the locks. I noticed it on a Wednesday when I hobbled out to the mailbox at the end of the driveway and found it completely empty. Meanwhile, sitting on the far kitchen counter was a stack of already opened envelopes. Electric bills, water bills, statements from my primary bank account. Did I get switched to paperless billing for everything? I asked Jolene. Her voice came back as warm as fresh bread. "It's just easier to manage online, Dad. That way you don't have to worry about paper piling up." She squeezed my arm with both hands, offering that efficient, trademark smile. "That's why we're here. My bank statements." She opened my bank statements. "All right," I said, having to work to keep my tone steady, because my throat felt like it was closing up, and I didn't even understand why. "I still want to keep picking up my own mail." "Of course," she was still smiling. "I'll switch it back." But she didn't switch it back. The following Monday, Caleb sat across from me after breakfast and slid another form across the table. This time, it was from the bank. He explained it with the same casual confidence he used for the power of attorney. "It's just an application to add me as a joint account holder," he said, "just in case something unexpected happens and I need to cover expenses quickly." He called it emergency access, like a spare tire. You hope you never need it, but you're glad it's there. My chest throbbed with a dull ache. Not my ankle, my chest. It was the specific kind of pain felt by a man who desperately wants to trust the person in front of him, but can no longer convince himself to do so. I signed it. May God forgive me. I signed it because I was still trying to be reasonable. I was still trying to be a father who wouldn't accuse his own son without absolute proof. That night, I heard them talking in the hallway outside my bedroom. I wasn't asleep. Sleep had been hard to come by ever since the surgery. Their voices drifted through the crack of the door, kept low and fast, that specific tone people use when they think they're being quiet. I heard Caleb's voice first. "The timeline needs to be moved up." Then Jolene's, tighter, sharper. "Not until the account transfer's clear. We have to make this ironclad." He won't notice for weeks. Him? I thought. Which him? Then Jolene's voice dropped so low it was practically a whisper. Keep him comfortable. Keep him grateful. That's all you have to do. The sound faded down the hallway. I lay in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs, staring blankly at the ceiling. I turned those words over in my mind one by one, like flipping over a rock when you're not quite sure you want to see what's underneath. Keep him comfortable. Keep him grateful. My wife used to say that the most dangerous lies are the ones that look exactly like love. She was talking about something else at the time, a neighbor's situation years ago. I had just nodded and gone back to my business, letting the sentence drift away without truly understanding it. Lying in the dark, in my own bedroom, in the house that now carried locks I hadn't chosen, listening to my son's footsteps fade down the hall, I understood it completely for the first time, right down to my bones. The part of my gut that Lorraine called the truth teller had stopped asking questions. It had started keeping score. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there until the house went still and the clock on the nightstand read 2:47. Staring at the ceiling, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been dodging for weeks. Not, what are they doing, but, how far have they already gone? The morning light crept through the front window, gray and thin. It was less of an illumination and more of a cold reminder that the night was over. I was awake before 4. My ankle throbbed with the low, persistent ache of bone that hasn't decided whether to forgive you for breaking it. And those words I overheard through the door kept looping through my mind. Keep him comfortable, keep him grateful. I grabbed my crutches from beside the bed and worked my way down the hallway. The house was quiet. Caleb and Jolene's bedroom door was still shut, no sound coming from inside. I made it to the living room, and then I stopped dead in my tracks. The shelf above the fireplace was completely bare. I need you to understand what that mantelpiece meant. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't a random collection of clutter. Every single item on that shelf had been placed there by Lorraine, or by the two of us together. The weight of each object had nothing to do with its physical size. Our wedding photo had been there, framed in the dark oak her mother gave us. A small brass carriage clock that sat on her side of the mantel for 30 years, passed down from her father. A blue ceramic vis she brought back from our only trip out of the country. A long weekend in Quebec City, back in 1994. We had splurged on train tickets and a hotel room we could barely afford. And on the way home, Lorraine wrapped that vase in a sweater and kept it in her lap the whole ride because she refused to let it out of her sight. And a music box, a small piece of green lacquerware I saved for 3 months to buy her for our first anniversary when money was tight. She kept it wound. Every Sunday morning, for 40 years, she would wind it up. It didn't play anything famous, just a simple melody. But I heard it every Sunday of my married life. And I hadn't listened to it once since she died, because I couldn't bring myself to lift the lid. All of it was gone. The shelf was just a blank rectangle of painted wood. I gripped my crutches so hard my knuckles turned white. The ache in my chest had nothing to do with my ankle. It was an older, deeper pain that surged up into my throat and burned. I forced myself to take slow, deliberate breaths through my nose, using the military habit to clamp down on emotions, trying to breach the surface at the wrong moment. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb walked into the room, wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He saw me standing in front of the fireplace, and a quick flicker of calculation crossed his face before he slapped on a relaxed smile. "Morning, Dad. You're up early." "Where are they?" The words came out rougher than I intended. He tilted his head. Where's what? The things on this shelf. I turned to face him completely. The clock, the picture, the vase from Quebec, and your mother's music box that she wound every Sunday morning for 40 years. My voice cracked at the end, and I hated it. But I locked eyes with him. Where are they, Caleb? He let out a slow exhale, the sound of a man trying to practice patience. Dad, while you were sleeping last week, we cleared out some clutter. The house needed room to breathe. You just had too much stuff. Some of it was just hoarding. That was your mother's, I said, my voice sharp enough to make him freeze. That was Lorraine's. You had no right to touch a single piece of it. Where is it? Jolene appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a dish towel, her face arranged into a picture of gentle concern. Dad, we donated some of it. We thought. Donated. The word hit my chest like a rock thrown into still water. You donated your mother's music box. Well, some of it might have gone to. Jolene started. Be quiet. I raised a hand, and it was shaking. Not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding back a voice that might say things I couldn't take back. That vase was carried on Lorraine's lap all the way back from Quebec City on a train. Do you understand what I'm telling you? In her lap. My eyes were burning, and I didn't care to hide it. And you donated it. Caleb crossed his arms. Dad, you can't keep living in a museum. Mom has been gone for over a year. You have to move on at some point. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and something deep inside me that had been trying to stay warm went completely cold. Get out of this room, I said quietly. Both of you, right now. Jolene placed a hand on Caleb's arm, and they backed away. I heard them talking in low, hushed tones in the kitchen. I turned back to the empty shelf, letting myself feel the full weight of the loss, because there were no witnesses left and no reason to hold it in. The music box was gone. The vase was gone. 43 years of a life built with the woman I loved had been swept away in an afternoon, under the guise of helping me move on. Standing in front of that fireplace with burning eyes and trembling hands, I made myself a promise. I would never ask another question. I would never accept another reasonable-sounding answer. Tomorrow morning, before either of them woke up, I was going to find out exactly what else they were doing behind my back. I was up at 4:30 the next morning, not because I woke up, but because I had never gone to sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me until the clock showed an hour late enough for me to move without making noise. Then I grabbed my crutches and went searching for the truth I was facing. Caleb kept his paperwork in the bottom drawer of the desk in the den. The den used to be my personal space. Until their second week here, when he quietly took it over while I was doing ankle exercises in the bedroom, moving in his laptop and files. The drawer wasn't locked. As I pulled it open, I remembered thinking he hadn't locked it because he never entertained the thought that I would check. He was that convinced I was harmless. The first thing I found was a manila folder with Mercer Estate Management written across the front in Caleb's handwriting. My hands were steady as I opened it. At least I had that much left. The power of attorney was on top. 2 pages. It was the document I had signed at the kitchen table. But with a difference, I had to read twice to fully grasp. My signature was at the bottom of the second page, written in my handwriting, spelling out my name, except I had never signed a second page. I had only signed the first. I was as sure of that as I was of my own reflection in a mirror. A man knows the unique stroke of his own hand, the way he forms an R, and the slight leftward slant he's had since the third grade. The signature on page 2 was close, very close, but it wasn't mine. My chest went tight and cold, like a window had been thrown open in January. I laid the folder on the desk, took a slow, deliberate breath, and kept reading. Behind the power of attorney was a bank form, an application to change the beneficiary on my primary savings account, the one Lorraine and I had built over 30 years. An account I had intended, and still intended, to leave to 3 charities she believed in. The new beneficiaries listed were Caleb and Jolene Mercer. The signature approving the change was mine, or someone's best attempt at imitating it. Behind that was a letter from a real estate company I'd never heard of, addressed to Caleb, confirming an appointment to appraise the property at my address. The letter was dated 3 weeks prior, thanking Caleb for his inquiry and noting that the initial evaluation would be completed within 10 business days. A property appraisal on my house, requested by my son without a word to me. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Folder in the drawer, drawer closed. My hands weren't shaking. My hands weren't shaking. I want to be clear about that, because what I felt wasn't the kind of emotion that makes you tremble. It was a cold, hard settling, the kind of feeling that takes over when a man stops being surprised and becomes absolutely certain instead. There is a difference between the two, and I've lived long enough to know which one is more dangerous. I went back to the kitchen, sat at the table, and pulled out my phone. It was 5:15 a.m., which meant I couldn't call anyone yet, but I could send a message. I found the number for Warren Stills, the attorney who had handled Lorraine's estate and drawn up our wills 12 years ago. I hadn't spoken to Warren in over a year. I typed carefully, weighing every word. "Warren, this is Russ Mercer. I need to see you today if possible. I have documents that require your eyes. It is urgent." I set the phone on the table and looked out the window as the first gray light of dawn began to break. Down the hall, I heard Caleb's alarm go off, heard the muffled thud as he shut it off, heard movement in the bedroom. In a few minutes, he would walk down those stairs, step into this kitchen, pour himself a cup of coffee, and say in that easy, casual voice, "Morning, Dad." And I would say, "Morning." Neither of us would mention what was in that bottom drawer, because I needed him to stay completely unaware that I knew anything. Not yet. Not until I sat across from Warren Stills and laid out the full scope of what they had done. So when Caleb walked past the kitchen doorway in his socks, yawning and rubbing his head, saying, "Dad, up early again? You all right?" I looked up and let my face do what it needed to do. "Ankle was throbbing too much to sleep," I said. "Same as usual." He gave a satisfied nod and reached for the coffee pot. I sat at my own kitchen table, watching my son pour himself a cup of coffee from my coffee maker. In my house, while keeping every trace of what I was feeling locked firmly behind my eyes and inside my chest. Then I settled in to wait for Warren Stills to call me back. 2 days passed without a word from Warren. His assistant said he was in court and would get back to me before the weekend. I navigated those 2 days carefully, keeping my words few and my expression that of a tired old man recovering from surgery. Nothing more. Caleb seemed content with that, and Jolene did too. I realized later that was their flaw. They were easily satisfied whenever they believed they were getting their way. On the 3rd morning, Caleb came downstairs in high spirits. It wasn't his usual mood, but a noticeable surge of energy, the kind a person carries when they're bursting to announce good news they've been sitting on for too long. He poured himself some coffee, poured a cup for me without asking, and sat down across the table with a wide smile. "Dad," he said, "I want to talk to you about something. Good news." My stomach sank. In my experience, when someone tells you they have good news with that specific look on their face, it's never good news for you, only for them. He reached into his jacket pocket. I noticed he was already dressed to go out, and slid a brochure across the table. It was a glossy, full-color pamphlet. The cover showed a stone building surrounded by pine trees, with paved walking paths and manicured flower beds. The title across the top read, "Pennyview Recovery and Wellness Center." "It's a recovery facility," Caleb said, leaning forward on his elbows. "Top-tier specialists, physical therapy, state-of-the-art equipment. It's infinitely better for your ankle than anything we can do here at home." "Dad, they have heated therapy pools. You'll get actual, professional rehabilitation there instead of just waiting around the house." I picked up the brochure and turned it over. The address on the back was in another county, a place I barely knew. On the other side of the ridge, more than a 2-hour drive from the home and people I had known my entire life. I stared at the pictures, reading through the list of amenities inside. Then, in small print, at the bottom of the back page, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were specifically looking for it, I found the line that laid it all bare. Pennyview Recovery and Wellness Center, specializing in long-term care and assisted living services. Assisted living, not a temporary rehab facility, not a short-term recovery center. An assisted living home. I laid the brochure flat on the table and looked at my son. "This is a nursing home, Caleb." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Dad, that's a narrow way to look at it. The back page says, assisted living." I tapped the paper with my finger. "It's a full-spectrum care facility, but it has a rehab wing," he said. "You'd be in the rehab wing." "For how long?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second, a delay that was half a second too long. "As long as you need." Jolene appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, watching us. She didn't sit down. A woman like her never sits down when she's marking her territory. "The surgeon told me 6 to 8 weeks on crutches." I kept my tone flat and slow, picking each word like a man placing his feet on narrow stones across a river. "After that, I walk on my own legs. I don't need an assisted living facility, Caleb. I just need 6 weeks, and then I walk out of here on my own 2 feet. Dad." Caleb's tone shifted. It was still controlled, but something harder surfaced underneath, something he was no longer bothering to hide. "You're 71 years old. You can't maintain this house by yourself. Because of your ankle, you can barely make it to the bathroom on your own. That's what recovery is, Caleb." Voice tightening. I felt a flush of heat creeping up my neck. "It's temporary. But this," I pushed the brochure back out across the table toward him, "is not temporary. We both know it." Jolene uncrossed her arms, walked over, and placed her hand flat on the brochure, a gesture of ownership over something she already considered hers. "We just want what's best for you, Dad," she said, her voice smooth and patient, like a woman reciting a script she had rehearsed. "You deserve real care, real support." "What I deserve," I said, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair until my knuckles went white, "is to be asked, not notified." Asked. I locked eyes with Caleb. "You already signed the paperwork for this place, didn't you?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with the calculation I could see playing out behind his eyes. "We made preliminary arrangements," he admitted, "just to hold a spot. Without my signature?" "Dad, It was 2. Without my signature. Every word dropped like a lead weight. Caleb stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The set of his jaw was something I hadn't seen since he was 15, and I grounded him for doing something foolish. "It's settled, Dad," he said. "We're going this weekend. It's best for everyone. Best for everyone." I sat in that chair, my heart pounding, hands trembling on the armrests. I looked at my son, my boy, standing in my kitchen, telling me he had made a decision about where I would live without ever consulting me. I realized with cold, absolute clarity that arguing was not going to change a thing. I also realized something else, something I hadn't told either of them. Warren Stills hadn't called back yet. I didn't have what I needed. In my 71 years, I've learned that when the ground starts giving way under your feet, the smartest move isn't always to fight the slide. Sometimes, you have to keep your footing until you find solid ground. So I said nothing more. I let Caleb think he had won. And then I started counting down the days. Saturday came, and still no call from Warren. I checked my phone every hour starting Thursday morning. Nothing. His assistant kept saying he was stuck in depositions. Before the weekend, she had promised. The weekend had arrived, and now it was Saturday afternoon. At 2 o'clock, Caleb stood in my bedroom doorway holding his truck keys, a look on his face that signaled the conversation was over. "The bags are in the truck," he said. "You're ready whenever you are." I had packed only one bag, not because I intended to stay at that facility. I had zero intention of staying there. But because lying in bed on Friday night with my phone on the nightstand, I made a choice. I had to get into that truck. I needed to hear what they would say when they thought the job was done. I needed to see the full shape of the scheme I was up against before I made my move. Sometimes, the only way to get a look at the whole picture is to go along for the ride. So I grabbed my crutches and picked up my bag. I got into the back seat of Caleb's truck, determined to be the most cooperative, harmless, and forgettable passenger he had ever driven. The first 40 minutes of the drive were quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that exists between people who have plenty to say, but choose to keep their mouths shut. Jolene sat passenger seat, thumbing endlessly through her phone. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed. On the road ahead, the radio turned off. Outside the windows, the town faded away, replaced by the highway, which eventually turned into a 2-lane road winding up into the mountains. The sky ahead turned a bruised, gloomy shade. I watched the road signs. I had driven these routes for 30 years. My old surveying work had taken me through these mountains countless times. I knew the way to Pineview, and I knew we were on it. I also knew that once we crossed the county line, the distance back to my house would become an impassable gulf for a man on crutches. "Caleb," I spoke up, keeping my tone light, like casual small talk. "What's the setup like at this place? Do I get my own room?" "Private room," he said without looking back. "You'll like it, and I can come up on weekends to visit." A brief silence followed. Then Jolene added, not even raising her eyes from her phone, "Let's just get you settled first, Dad. We can figure out the details later." Details. Right then, the last lingering trace of warmth inside me went completely cold. I watched the trees lining the highway close in around us. We were gaining elevation, and I could feel it in my ears. The first drops of rain hit the windshield, sparse at first, then coming faster. Caleb turned on the wipers, their mechanical rhythm sweeping across the glass, a sound that somehow felt even more isolating than the silence. Your mother used to love driving up this way, I said. Caleb's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly, just a fraction, but I caught it. The fall views up here are incredible, I continued, keeping my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Every year she'd make me pull over at the overlook above the ridge. Said it was the best view in the whole state. My throat felt tight, but I pushed through because I needed him to hear it. She would have been 70 this September. Dad. Caleb's voice carried a sharp edge of impatience. If she saw what you were doing right now, she wouldn't recognize you, I said softly. You know that. You knew your mother. You know she would never stand for this. The truck jerked violent to the right. Not a sweeping turn, but a quick, panicked twitch that had half the truck on the gravel shoulder before Caleb corrected it. Jolene grabbed the door handle and snapped his name. Caleb. Half warning, half something tighter. Caleb pulled all the way off the road and brought the truck to a stop. The tires crunched in the gravel, and then everything was still, except for the rain, hammering the roof and the wipers going back and forth like nothing had happened. He sat there with both hands on the wheel, his shoulders rising and falling with his breath. I could see the back of his neck turning red. Don't, he said, his voice dropping into a register I had never heard from him before, low and thick. Don't bring her into this. She's already in it, I said. Every choice you've made since you walked into my house was something she'd. I said, don't talk about her. He spun around in his seat, and the look on his face. I'm 71 years old, and I want to tell you, looking at my son's face right then was the first time I was almost afraid of him. Not because of his anger, but because of the coldness underneath it. You want to talk about Mom? His voice cracked, then went hard as ice. Mom's not here. She doesn't get a vote. And frankly, Dad, neither do you. Not anymore. Jolene put her hand on his arm, not to stop him, but to steady him. There's a difference. Caleb shoved his door open, letting the rain blow inside. He stepped out and walked around the front of the truck. I watched him through the rain-streaked windshield, and I knew. The kind of knowing your body does before your brain even has time to formulate. The thought that what was coming wasn't going to be a conversation. The way he walked around the hood was like a man who had already passed judgment. And all that was left was executing it. Not fast, not slow, just steady, the way you move toward something you've been working toward for a long time. He pulled my door open. Get out, he said. I looked up at him from the back seat. The rain was coming down like a curtain behind him, and the cab light was hitting his face. I didn't see anger there anymore. Anger burns, and the look on Caleb's face had gone past burning into something cold and set. That was worse. 1,000 times worse. Caleb, I tried to keep my voice steady, thinking about what you're doing. I've been thinking about it for months. He reached in, grabbed my left arm above the elbow, and hauled. I want to tell you what that felt like. Not to make you feel sorry for me, but because I think it matters that you understand what kind of man my son had turned into. I'm 71 years old. I have 4 titanium screws in my ankle. And the surgeon told me in no uncertain terms that the foot wasn't allowed to take weight. I weigh 162 pounds, with the kind of upper body strength that comes from 40 years of carrying survey equipment up hillsides. Which is to say, I'm not frail. But I'm not 42, and I wasn't expecting it. When Caleb pulled, I came out of that seat with no dignity at all. Half falling, I grabbed the door frame with my free hand, and my left foot swung out and hit the running board. The white-hot, blinding pain went straight up my leg to my teeth, and for a full second, I couldn't see anything at all. I gripped that door frame with both hands, refusing to let go. "Stop!" I said, my voice hoarse with pain. "Caleb, stop!" He peeled my fingers off the frame one by one. Then he reached under my arms, dragged me clear of the vehicle, and dropped me into the pouring rain. My right knee hit the wet gravel shoulder hard, the impact jarring all the way up to my hip, and I heard myself make a sound. A short, sharp grunt of pain I couldn't swallow in time. A sound I hadn't meant to make. He let go. I was on my knees, on the shoulder of a mountain road in a thunderstorm, struggling to keep from going face down. My left leg was stuck straight out to the side, because letting it touch the ground was something I couldn't even bring myself to try. "The crutches," I said. "Caleb, I can't stand up without them." He reached back into the truck and grabbed both crutches. I heard them scrape against the back seat. He turned around and threw them, not onto the road, but into the drainage ditch running alongside the shoulder, full of 6 inches of fast-moving water from the storm. 2 distinct splashes, then the sound of the current catching them, and then nothing. My chest went tight, not from fear, but from the sudden, complete understanding of what he'd done. He hadn't acted on impulse. He had acted on impulse. He had thought about where to throw them. He threw them where the water would carry them away, because things carried away by water don't come back. I was on my knees in the gravel, rain hitting my face, looking up at my son. I said, "Caleb, please." He crouched down, bringing his face level with mine, close enough that I could see the water running down his forehead. He kept his voice low, flat, and absolute. "If you disappear tonight, nobody is going to notice. Nobody is coming for you, old man. Nobody." Every word landed like a blow, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because of the utter steadiness behind them. He wasn't yelling in anger. He was stating a fact he had already verified. The passenger window rolled down. Jolene leaned across the console, her voice the smoothest, steadiest thing I'd heard all day. Unhurried, unbothered, almost gentle. The tone of someone entirely comfortable with what was happening. "Don't expect anyone to come looking for you," she said. She held my eyes for a full second. "We won't." The window rolled back up. Caleb stood up and brushed the water off his jeans, like a man dusting off his hands after a dirty job. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and shut the door. The engine revved. The headlights swept across the pavement, and I watched those 2 red taillights grow bright in the rain, shrink, and disappear around the curve ahead. Then, there was nothing on that road. Just rain, pitch darkness, and the rushing water in the ditch, taking my crutches further away. I stayed on my knees in the gravel for a long time. It felt long, though it probably wasn't. The first thing I felt wasn't fear. I want to be honest about that, because looking back, it surprised even me. The first thing, before the cold, before the calculations of how to survive, was grief. A grief so complete and sudden it made it hard to breathe, like stepping into ice water. Not grief for myself, but for the boy I had held in the delivery room, for the Little League games, for teaching him to drive, for 40 years of trying to be a decent father. Grief for whatever had happened along the way, whatever I had missed, misread, or failed to prevent, that turned him into what was standing on that road. Then the fear arrived, right on time, because I was on my knees in the dark, in a pouring rainstorm, on a mountain road, with no way to stand up. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since we left home. My left ankle was screaming, and I was entirely alone. I looked down into the ditch, making one last attempt. I stretched my arm out as far as it would go, reaching into the cold, rushing water, but my fingers found only gravel and current. They were gone. I pulled my hand back and looked at the road. Wet, dark, empty, in both directions. I made a choice. The choice was this: I was not going to die on this road. It sounds simple. It sounds like a line from a movie, neat and tidy. But I want you to know what it actually meant. Kneeling in the dark on wet gravel, rain pouring down, the cold soaking through my jacket into my shoulders. It wasn't a heroic choice, or even a brave one. It was just the only choice left. I made it the way anyone makes a choice when there's only one option left. Not out of inspiration, but out of the sheer stubbornness of a man who spent his life refusing to let circumstances tell him what he could or couldn't do. I put both hands flat on the pavement and pushed. Getting up without one leg working and with nothing to hold on to is harder than it sounds, and it sounds hard enough. I got my right knee under me, planted my right foot flat, and pushed up from there. For one wobbly second, I was up. Standing on one leg in the rain on the shoulder of a mountain road at 71 years old. Then my right knee buckled under the awkward effort, and I went back down, landing on my hands. I cursed out loud, using a word I won't repeat here, one Lorraine wouldn't have approved of. "All right," I said to the empty air. "All right, that's fine. If I couldn't walk, I'd crawl." I want to describe the exact mechanics of it, because it matters to the story, and I think you deserve to know. My left ankle was the one with 4 titanium screws. My left ankle was the one the surgeon said could take 0 weight. My left ankle, at that moment, was letting me know in very clear terms how unhappy it was with the last 20 minutes. But my hands worked. My right knee worked, bruised from the gravel, but functioning. My right foot worked. What I could do, and what I did, was put my weight on my hands and my right knee, keep the left leg stretched out straight behind me, and drag myself forward. 3 points of contact. Dragging one leg. It was hard on the hips and wrists after a few minutes, slow and painful, but it was movement. I moved along the shoulder, staying off the soft dirt at the edge where my hands would sink in. The asphalt was better, cold, wet, and hard, but solid. After a while, I found a rhythm. Hands forward, knee forward, drag the left leg, pause. Hands forward, knee forward, drag, pause. The rain didn't stop, and the temperature didn't rise. "You're fine, Russ," I said out loud, because I needed to hear a voice and mine was the only one available. "You're moving. Moving is living. Keep moving." Lorraine would have laughed at me talking to myself on a mountain road. She would have laughed, and then she would have said, in that practical way of hers, "Then stop jawing and crawl faster." Thinking of her saying that, hearing her voice so clearly in my head with the exact cadence she used, made my eyes burn so bad, I had to stop and take slow breaths for a minute. "Not yet," I told her, or myself, or the rain. "Not yet. I'll cry later. I have somewhere to be." I crawled. I don't know how far I crawled. The dark made distance hard to judge, and the cold was starting to mess with my sense of time. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. I passed a reflector post and looked for the next one, using them as markers, telling myself each one was progress, each one was a small victory. A man who could crawl from one post to the next could crawl to the one after that. 40 years of land surveying had taught me to break impossible distances into manageable sections, and I applied that to crawling in the rain. Your mind will accept things your body wants to refuse if you keep the targets small enough. My right wrist started throbbing with a deep grinding pain where the cartilage was complaining. I stopped to rest the wrist, switching to my forearms for a stretch, which was slower but easier on the joints. My jacket was completely soaked, and every time I moved, I felt the cold water shifting against my skin. It was past uncomfortable. It was the kind of cold that, if you let it, takes over and starts making decisions for you. That was when a name came back to me, out of the back of my mind, from the quiet place that stays sharp no matter what. Hatch. I hadn't thought about Colonel Dwight Hatchet in years. Not in a real way. He was part of a chapter of my life from 50 years ago that had closed and stayed closed, the way most chapters do when life keeps moving forward. But lying face down on a dark mountain road, something in my mind went looking for the people who had never dropped the ball, and it found him. Never leave your people behind, he used to say when we were young, and he was our commander. The words had a specific tactical meaning back then. Not in the field, not anywhere. You go back for them every time. No exceptions. I had never consciously thought about whether I held that as a general rule or a way to live. I had just taken it for granted that the world worked that way. Or at least, I had until the last few months. I lifted my head, far up the road, so far it might have been wishful thinking. Something moved in the dark. A low, yellow beam of light, rounding the curve above me, slow and steady. I stopped breathing. I stared at it, watching it grow, making sure it was real. My heart hit my ribs so hard I felt it in my throat, and I started doing the only math that mattered. How much strength did I have left, and was it enough to get seen? I had about 30 seconds. I had calculated it before the thought fully formed. From the time those headlights rounded the curve to when they would see me, or miss me, slow down, or keep driving, disappearing into the dark, with their warmth and hope, I had 30 seconds. I put both hands flat on the road. With the last of the strength in my arms, I pushed myself up, got my right foot under me, and stood. One leg, 71 years old, soaked through, shaking from the cold, the pain, and everything that had happened since Caleb left. I stood in the middle of that mountain road on one leg and raised both arms over my head, waving them wide and slow in the rain. Impossible to miss. Because a man standing on one leg in the middle of a road at night waving his arms is either someone who needs help or a hazard, and I made sure I looked like the first one. The headlights slowed. My heart gave a hard thump, and I nearly lost my balance. "Stop!" I said out loud, putting the word out into the rain as if that would make it happen. "Please, stop." The truck pulled over. It was an old domestic pickup, dark-colored. The kind that had been worked hard for years but kept running through the sheer stubbornness of an owner who believed in finishing what he started. The engine idled for one terrifying second, and nobody got out. They think I'm trouble, I thought. They're going to drive around me. People do that. People decide not to get involved. Then the door opened. A man climbed down, moving the way certain older men move. Not slow, exactly, and not careful, but deliberate, every movement calculated, no energy wasted. He wasn't tall, even when I knew him. But he carried a presence that made it seem like he didn't need height to fill whatever space he was in. He walked toward me through the rain with his head down against the weather, collar pulled up. When he got 10 feet from me, he raised his head, and the headlights caught his face. "Easy there," he said. "Lord above, friend, what are you doing out here, in the middle of nowhere at this hour?" His voice. I can't explain what it feels like, to hear a voice you haven't heard in 50 years, and know it on the very first syllable. Not recognize it, know it. The way you know the smell of your childhood house, or the weight of a tool you used for decades. It bypassed my brain and hit something older and deeper, bringing absolute certainty instead of a memory. He stepped close enough for the light to hit my face, and he stopped. His chin came up. Russ. The word was almost a whisper, rough with something I'd never heard in his voice when I was 19, something that sounded almost like pain. Russell Mercer. My throat locked up completely. I opened my mouth, and what came out wasn't words, just his name split in half by a catch in my breath I couldn't control. Hatch. Then Colonel Dwight Hatchett, 78 years old, not tall anymore, gray-haired, with deep lines in his face, crossed the last few feet between us and got his shoulder under my arm just before my right leg gave out. He held on, and I grabbed him with both hands, hanging on for a long moment. "I've got you," he said into my ear, low and steady. "I've got you, Russ. You're all right. You hear me? You're all right," I cried. I want to admit that, honestly. It wasn't quiet or dignified. It was the breakdown of a man who had held everything in for too long, letting it go all at once. I shook and cried, holding on to that 78-year-old man on the shoulder of a mountain road in a thunderstorm, and he didn't pull back or shift. He just kept his shoulder steady under my arm and spoke softly into my ear. "Let's get you in the truck," he said. "Come on. One step. I've got your weight." He worked me over to the passenger door, opened it, and got me into the seat with a careful, organized strength that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with a lifetime of knowing how to leverage what was available to get a job done. He went around to the back, came back with a wool blanket, an old olive-drab military blanket that would never be soft, no matter how many times it was washed, and draped it over my shoulders. Then he climbed into the driver's side, turned the heater all the way up, and looked at me. "Tell me," he said. "All of it." So I told him. I told him about Caleb and Jolene moving in, about the locks, the accounts, the paperwork in the den at 4 in the morning. I told him about the brochure, the argument, and how the truck came to a stop on the shoulder of this road. I told him how crutches went into the ditch, and I repeated word for word what Caleb and Jolene had said. I watched Hatch's face while I talked. He didn't interrupt once. He didn't make sympathetic noises or gasps of shock. He just listened with that same quality I had noticed 50 years ago. A way of listening that made you feel every word was being received, weighed, and kept safe. As he listened, his face changed. Not dramatically, with big emotional shifts, but the way the sky changes before weather comes in. Slow, deep, shifting from open concern to something quieter, colder, and ready. When I finished, he sat with both hands on the wheel, leaning forward, looking out through the rain-streaked windshield for a long time. Then he turned to me and asked, "Where's your house, Russ? Not the place they were sending you, your house." "Clover Mill Road," I said. "About 40 minutes back." He nodded, put the truck in gear, and turned around. The heater blew across my shins, and the wool blanket held the chill off. As we drove down out of the high country, the rain on the glass turned into a drizzle. During those first 10 minutes, I stopped shaking. Not all at once, but gradually, the way warmth comes back into a body that's been cold for a long time. Slow, careful, but real. Hatch drove the way he did everything else, without rush or wasted movement, both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. He didn't fill the silence with talk. He never had. That was one of the things I remembered about him from 50 years ago, something that set him apart from the other officers I served under. He understood that silence between people who trusted each other wasn't empty. It was just rest. After a while, I asked, "You live up on this mountain now?" 12 years, he said. Small place off Garnet Ridge Road. 20 acres, a creek. Nobody bothers me. His mouth twitched slightly. Until tonight. "I'm sorry," I said. "Sorry for falling on your road. Don't apologize for that." His voice went flat and serious. "Never apologize for that." I watched the dark trees pass outside the passenger window, thinking about the odds of meeting this specific man on this specific road, on this specific night. I couldn't find a proper word for it, except something Lorraine used to say about an unseen hand putting the right person on the right path at the exact moment it mattered. I'd been an agnostic about that kind of talk most of my life, but sitting in that truck, wet and alive, I felt that stance loosening. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Ask away, Russ. What brought you out on a night like this?" He was quiet for a moment. "Hardware store closes at 7, he said. "Needed a chain for a gate latch. Been putting it off for 2 weeks. He shook his head slowly. 2 weeks. Imagine that. My throat caught again, and I had to look out the window until the feeling passed. I want to tell you what kind of man Dwight Hatchett was, because I don't think you can fully understand what happened that night without knowing who was behind that wheel. When I met him, I was 19, carrying that specific brand of fear, unique to a young man who has signed up for something bigger than himself and is just beginning to realize what that means. Hatch was only 26, but he was already an officer, the kind of man who seemed born knowing his purpose. He knew all our names, not as a management trick or leadership strategy, but simply because he remembered the people who mattered to him. He knew where each of us came from, who had family waiting, and who didn't. He could spot a man struggling before the man even realized it himself, stepping in quietly to offer help without drama, or making the man feel small for needing it. That line, "Never leave your people behind, not in the field, not anywhere," was never a rule he memorized. It was just who he was. Sitting in his truck, wrapped in his blanket, I realized with full clarity that he intended to go right on being that man for as long as he had breath in his body. "You saved my life tonight," I said. "I just gave you a ride," he replied. "Hatch." He glanced over at me. In the dim light from the dashboard, his eyes were the same ones I remembered, steady, deep, unhurried by sentiment, but unclosed to it either. "All right," he said. "Maybe a little more than a ride. I wouldn't have made it through the night without you." He didn't argue. He looked back at the road and nodded. "I know," he said. I could see that when I got out of the truck. We drove in silence after that. By the time we hit the valley road, the rain had settled into a fine mist, and the first house lights appeared through the trees, warm and yellow in the dark. "What's your plan?" Hatch asked. Call the sheriff," I said. "Call my lawyer. Then sit in my own chair and wait for my son to come home." Hatch nodded slowly, as if running the plan through his mind and finding it sound. "You want company while you wait?" I looked at him. 78 years old, with a gate chain in his back seat, a man with no reason to get mixed up in another family's mess. "I'd appreciate it," I said. "Then it's done." He turned his eyes back to the road. "Which street?" "Clover Mill Road. 3rd left after the gas station." He took the turn without slowing down, knowing exactly where he was going. For the first time since Saturday afternoon, I knew where I was going, too. Hatch helped me up the front walk, taking it one careful step at a time with his shoulder under my arm. Neither of us said much because there was no need. He found the spare key under the edge of the second step, where I told him it had been for 11 years, unlocked the door, and got me inside to my big recliner by the front window. The chair where I'd spent most of the last three weeks. He's turned on every light in the room. I don't know why that detail stayed with me, but it did. He didn't just switch on one lamp. He walked around, turning on every light until the room was bright. The house went from dark and empty to present and alive, and seeing that lifted some of the heavy weight in my chest. "The phone," he said. I pointed to the side table. He brought it over, then walked toward the kitchen. I heard him opening and closing cabinet doors, with the quiet efficiency of a man assessing a strange space. A minute later, he came back with a glass of water and set it down beside me without a word. I called the sheriff's office first. The dispatcher who answered had the kind of voice that stays steady no matter what you tell her. A trained, professional calm. I was grateful for it, because it meant I could give her the facts without having to manage her emotional reaction. I gave her my name and address. I told her I was a 71-year-old man recovering from ankle surgery who had been removed from a vehicle against my will on Mountain Road 9. I told her my walking aids had been thrown into a ditch, leaving me stranded in a storm, unable to walk, and that a witness had found me and brought me home. "Are you injured, sir?" she asked. "My ankle sustained some strain," I said. "I need a deputy, not an ambulance. I'm dispatching someone now. Can you stay on the line?" "I'm right here." Hatch sat in the chair across from me. He had poured himself a glass of water, too, holding it in both hands, watching me with that focused, unhurried gaze I had first met 50 years ago and never forgotten. My second call was to Warren Stills. It was past 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, so it went straight to voicemail. Exactly as expected. I kept my voice steady and brief. I told him I was Russell Mercer, and that I needed to see him first thing Monday morning. It was urgent and couldn't wait, as I had documents that required his personal review. I left my number twice and hung up. "Your lawyer?" Hatch asked. 40 years of paper trail to untangle," I said. "Powers of attorney, accounts, beneficiary changes, some of it signed with my name, but not by my hand." Hatch's jaw set. Not a big reaction, just a small, controlled flex of the muscle, the kind of subtle gesture on an otherwise impassive face that carries a whole lot of weight. "They forged my signature on at least 2 documents," I said. "Maybe more." He set his water glass down on the side table with a slow, deliberate click. "All right," he said. That single word carried a heavy stillness that gave me a sense of quiet reassurance. I couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't anger. It was something older and far more focused. "The deputy will need your statement when he gets here," I told him. "Where you found me, what condition I was in, the time. I know how statements work, Russ." There wasn't a trace of impatience in his voice, almost a touch of gentleness. "I'll tell them every single thing I saw, every last detail." We waited. The house was warm and bright, my house. Outside, the downpour had settled into a steady, quiet rain, tapping against the front window lane, like something asking to be let in. I looked around the room, taking in the walls, the furniture, and the carpet Lorraine had picked out back in 2003. The one I kept meaning to replace but never got around to. Sitting there, I felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost painful. "Hatch," I said. Yeah? They went to dinner. My voice came out far steadier than I felt inside. After they left me on that road, they went out to eat. I don't have proof yet, but I just know it. Some things, you just know. Something flashed across his face. A brief, tightly controlled reaction that, on a less disciplined man, would have exploded into raw fury. On Hatch, it lasted only a second before settling back into that quiet, cold resolve. Is that so? Then there'll be a receipt, he said. And a timestamp. That's what I'm thinking. Deputy Carl Briggs arrived at 10:20. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, solid build. He had his notepad out before he was fully inside the door. Introducing himself, he shook my hand, then Hatch's. He scanned the room with a practiced eye, took a seat across from us, and said, "Mr. Mercer, let's start from the beginning." I started from the very beginning. I gave it to him the exact same way I had described it to the dispatcher. Precise, chronological, no personal commentary. The truck, the road, the crutches in the ditch. What Caleb said, what Jolene said. When I finished, Hatch gave his statement. Where he found me, my condition, the exact time. Deputy Briggs wrote continuously, without interrupting either of us. When he finally finished writing and looked up from his pad, he said something that gave me my first absolute certainty that what I had set in motion would carry real weight. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "what you've described, abandoning an incapacitated adult in a dangerous environment and removing their means of seeking help, is a serious offense in this state. With a witness statement and your medical records, we have more than enough probable cause to move forward." He closed his notepad. "I need a description of the vehicle, as well as your son's full name and address." My hands were rock steady as I gave him the details. Completely, utterly steady. "I want to tell you what Caleb and Jolene were doing while I was crawling along that mountain road. The paper trail revealed everything during the investigation weeks later. I didn't know it at the time, but I put it together piece by piece like a puzzle I hadn't been there to see. I want to be clear about that, because I'm not a man who makes up things he didn't witness. What I am telling you comes from credit card statements produced during discovery, location data from Jolene's phone pulled by the sheriff's office, and internal records from the restaurant, and internal records subpoenaed from the Pleat picture. When all those pieces came together to form the complete picture. No, sir. I couldn't stop thinking. While I was face down on that road, reaching into a flooded ditch for crutches that were already gone. Caleb and Jolene were 40 minutes away, at a steakhouse called the Ridgeline Grill. It was a place on the county highway that Caleb always liked. The kind of spot with lighting and menu prices that made him feel like he had made it into a higher social circle. According to the receipt, they ordered at 9:14 p.m. 2 steaks, a bottle of wine, appetizers. They stayed for nearly 2 hours. I've thought a lot about those 2 hours. I've tried to picture what two people sit and talk about over a lavish dinner 40 minutes after leaving an old man on a mountain in the storm. I've tried, but I can't imagine it. Those kinds of people exist in the world, but there isn't a single part of me that can relate to how their minds work. I know what the evidence showed. The records proved that in the time between leaving that mountain road and arriving at the restaurant, neither of them made a single phone call. Not to emergency services, not to me, not to anyone. According to phone logs, they exchanged only 2 text messages during that window. I won't repeat what those messages said because they're part of the official case file, and that's where I choose to leave them. But when Deputy Briggs read them aloud to me later, I had to place my hands flat on the kitchen table just to keep myself grounded. For 30 seconds, I couldn't trust my own voice. Sitting across from me while Briggs read those texts, Hatch said nothing. But I saw his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee mug, as if physically holding down something that wanted to shatter the porcelain. They finished dinner at 11:06 p.m. Caleb paid with his card, the one linked to the joint account he had added his name to 6 weeks prior, the account that used to be mine alone. They left a 20% tip. I know because it was on the receipt. I don't know what to do with that detail, except that it sticks in your mind, while the larger facts somehow blur around the edges. According to the GPS data from Caleb's truck, they pulled into my driveway at 11:22 p.m. By then, I had been home for nearly 2 hours. Deputy Briggs had already come and gone. My voicemail was sitting on Warren Still's phone. I was sitting in my recliner with every light in the house turned on. A cold cup of coffee on the side table. Hatch was in the chair across from me. He had refused to leave, insisting on seeing the night through to its end. And I had given up trying to persuade him otherwise. We were talking about quiet, everyday things. The mountains. What land surveying was like back in the 80s. The creek on his property that flooded every spring. The kind of low-key conversation two men have when they're waiting for something and mutually agree not to speak about the thing they're waiting for. I heard the engine first, that specific idle, the distinct rumble of Caleb's truck. I had heard it pull up 100 times over the years, under entirely different circumstances. Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, ordinary Tuesday evenings. Driving up the street, slowing down, turning in. My hands tightened on the armrests. "They're here," I said. Hatch set his cup down. He sat up straight, feet flat on the floor, looking at me with those steady, deep eyes. "Ready?" I thought of that mountain road. I thought of the gravel under my palms, the freezing water in the ditch, the sound of my crutches splashing in. I remembered Caleb saying, "Nobody is coming for you." I thought of the 2 hours between then and now, and everything that had taken place. "I've been ready since the moment they drove away," I said. 2 truck doors slammed shut, followed by the sound of their voices. That was what hit me hardest. Their tone was light, relaxed. It was the sound of people returning home after an enjoyable evening, not people returning to face a crisis. I could hear them walking up the front path, chatting about nothing in particular. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The casual cadence said enough. They were still talking as Caleb pushed the front door open. He stepped in first, and under the bright overhead lights of the fully lit room, I saw his face clearly. The instant he saw me sitting in my chair, every drop of color drained from his face in a single second. I watched it happen. The relaxed, easy expression he walked in with dissolved like water from a broken glass, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The look of a man realizing his entire reality had just been upended. His mouth opened, then shut. His eyes darted to Hatch, sitting across from me, then back to me. In that split second of calculation, I could see him frantically trying and abandoning different explanations in his head. Jolene walked in right behind him. She saw me and did something I didn't expect. Her hand shot out, grabbing the door frame, as if the floor had suddenly tilted underneath her. Her purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a dull thud, and she didn't even reach down to pick it up. I looked at both of them, took my time, and said, "I have a surprise for you." Caleb's mouth started moving before his brain could catch up. Dad, my God. Dad, we came back for you. We felt terrible. We turned around. We were on our way back right now. I let him keep talking. I let him babble. It was the sound of a man digging himself deeper, words coming faster and faster, layering lies on top of lies, building a fragile tower of excuses. Jolene didn't say a word. She stepped into the room, picked up her purse, and stood frozen near the door. I noticed her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning, looking at Hatch, looking at the phone on the side table, looking at the notepad. Deputy Briggs had left on my armrest while stepping outside to his cruiser. She had always been faster at assessing a situation than Caleb. When Caleb finally ran out of breath, I said, "You were at the Ridgeline Grill." A dead silence settled over the room. "Your card was charged at 9:14 p.m., I said smoothly. "You were there for almost 2 hours. The GPS on your truck shows you arrived 40 minutes after leaving that road and left just before 11. I kept my tone perfectly level. My hands rested comfortably on my lap. I had spent the last 2 hours preparing for this moment, and I wasn't about to waste it on shouting. You didn't turn back for me, Caleb. You went out for dinner." Caleb's jaw trembled. Dad, those records. How do you—" "This is Colonel Dwight Hatchett," I said. "He found me on Mountain Road 9 about 25 minutes after you drove off, in the drainage ditch, reaching for my crutches." I paused, letting the reality settle in. He brought me home. 2 hours ago, he gave his statement to Deputy Briggs. I gave mine. Both are officially on record. Caleb spun toward Hatch like a desperate actor looking for a new audience. "Sir, I don't know what my father told you, but this is a private family matter. You don't know the whole story." "I know what I found on that road?" Hatch said, his voice quiet, carrying an absolute unquestionable weight. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Caleb turned back to me. In the span of 2 minutes, his face had gone through shock, calculation, frantic bargaining, and now, total collapse. The look of a man who had exhausted every tool in his arsenal and had no idea what to do next. His voice cracked. "Dad, don't do this. Please. You aren't really going to—" "Then there's the paperwork," I said. "The power of attorney with a signature on the second page that isn't mine. The beneficiary change on my savings account with a signature that isn't mine. And the property appraisal you ordered behind my back." With every point, I watched his face crumble further. "Warren Stills is going over every document on Monday morning. Though I don't think either of us needs to wait until Monday to know what he's going to find." Jolene let out a sharp gasp. Not a scream, not a cry, just a sharp intake of air. It was the closest I had ever heard her come to losing her composure. She immediately pressed her lips together, forcing herself back under control. But in that brief second, the polished mask she had worn since moving into my house shattered completely. Underneath wasn't remorse. It was the sheer panic of a woman realizing every exit route was blocked. Caleb took a step toward me, his voice dropping into a desperate whisper. "Dad, listen to me. Whatever you think you found, whatever this man told you, we can talk, just the two of us. We can fix this. We don't have to bring Caleb." My voice cut him off cold. I didn't raise it. I didn't have to. "You stood in the rain, looked down at me, and said, 'Nobody is coming for you.' Saying those words made my throat ache, but I let it ache. There was no avoiding the pain of this moment. I want you to know I heard every single word. I will carry those words with me for the rest of my life." I stared right at him without blinking. Nobody came for me, except for one man, The only man I've known in my life who never left anyone behind. He was there, and now, here we are. Headlights swept across the front window. Jolene saw them first. She turned toward the glass, her face morphing into the realization that her last chance had slipped away. Caleb turned sharply. Through the glass, he saw the cruiser pulling into the driveway. No flashing lights, but the engine hum was unmistakable. He turned back to me, his voice thin and panicked. It was a tone I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught doing something he couldn't talk his way out of. Dad, please. Just wait. Just give me a second, okay? Give me a chance to. It's too late, I said. I meant it. There was no anger left, which surprised even me. I thought I would feel more rage, but what took its place was a heavy, absolute sorrow. The feeling of a door that had been open for 40 years finally closing, knowing it would never open again. The knock on the door wasn't loud. A deputy making an arrest doesn't need to pound on the door. Deputy Briggs had called at 8:15 a.m. before Caleb and Jolene were even fully awake, saying he had follow-up matters and needed everyone present. His knock was 3 measured taps, unhurried, authoritative, conveying simple presence. Caleb beat everyone to the door, pulling it open. I saw him immediately shift into the persona he used whenever he wanted to smooth things over. Shoulders back, voice projected, hand reaching out for a handshake. Deputy Briggs didn't take it. "Officer, I think there's a massive misunderstanding here," Caleb said, his tone sliding back into the smooth, practiced charm that had fooled me for years. "My father had a fall. He was disoriented. We were on our way back to pick him up when, somehow, he caught a ride. This is just an unfortunate family miscommunication. I really think if we could just, Mr. Mercer," Deputy Briggs said, polite and firm. "Step back into the house, please." Caleb stepped back. He had no choice. Deputy Briggs walked into my living room in uniform, notepad in hand. He took head count with a cool, assessing gaze, locking eyes on Caleb. "I have a few questions regarding your whereabouts last night." "Of course," Caleb said quickly, almost eager. "Absolutely, we were." "Before you answer," Deputy Briggs cut in, his voice remaining polite, unbothered by Caleb's eagerness. "I want to make sure you understand. We have verified several key facts from the elder Mr. Mercer's statement. I suggest you answer truthfully." Caleb's posture shifted slightly, a subtle but distinct collapse. "Mr. Mercer filed a report last night, and our investigation began first thing this morning." Deputy Briggs read from his notepad without looking up. "We pulled the GPS records from your vehicle. They show that at 8:47 p.m. last night, the vehicle stopped on Mountain Road 9 for approximately 9 minutes. The coordinates match the location described by the elder Mr. Mercer, where Colonel Hatchett found him. Following that stop, GPS shows the vehicle traveled south on Road 9, turned east onto County Road 14, and arrived at the Ridgeline Grill at 9:11 p.m. He raised his head. You remained there until approximately 10:58 p.m. Your card was charged at 11:06 p.m. The sound Caleb made wasn't a word. It was the noise of a man whose carefully prepared lie had been crushed before he could even speak it. We also retrieved traffic camera footage along the Mountain Road 9 corridor. Deputy Briggs continued. State authorities installed those cameras 2 years ago, following a series of weather-related accidents. The footage confirms your vehicle stopped at 8:46 p.m., departed at 8:55 p.m., and shows Mr. Mercer on the road surface after your vehicle drove away. He snapped his notepad shut. I also have a witness statement from Colonel Hatchett detailing the condition, location, and time he found your father. It aligns in every detail with Mr. Mercer's account. Caleb held up both hands, palms out, a useless gesture against the overwhelming facts. All right. Look, I lost my temper. I know. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. But I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. It was an argument that escalated, a terrible mistake, and I want to make it right. I truly want to make it right. If we could just... Caleb. My voice was quiet, tired, but completely immovable. Be quiet. He looked at me. In that single, unguarded moment, all the calculation, performance, and polished charm dropped away. What was left was something I recognized from long ago. A boy who had done something terrible and was just beginning to realize the gravity of it. My chest ached with a dull, heavy pain that had nothing to do with my ankle. But I didn't look away, and I didn't take back a single word. Deputy Briggs stepped forward. Mr. Caleb Mercer, you are under arrest for reckless endangerment and abandonment of a vulnerable adult. Under state law, these are felony offenses. With practiced ease, he drew his handcuffs, stepped behind Caleb, and said, "Put your hands behind your back." Caleb's shoulders slumped. He let out a long sigh as all the fight drained out of him. He placed his hands behind his back. The two metallic clicks of the cuffs locking sounded unnaturally loud in my living room. He didn't resist or yell. He just stood there, hands bound behind him, head bowed slightly. Then, very softly, he said, "Dad." I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything that needed saying had already been said, and none of it had mattered until tonight. I wasn't going to waste my remaining words on a moment that was already over. Deputy Briggs led him toward the door. At the threshold, Caleb turned his head for one last look. I watched them walk down my front path toward the cruiser, heard the car door close, saw the headlights switch on, and watched the vehicle back out of my driveway and drive down Clover Mill Road until the taillights disappeared. Jolene stood to my left. She hadn't moved from her spot by the window through the entire ordeal. Her arms were folded tight across her chest, jaw set, eyes dry. Once the sound of the cruiser faded completely, she spoke in a voice stripped of all the warmth she used to fake. "What happens now?" I turned to look at her. "You will be out of this house before dark tomorrow," I said. "Every single item in this house belongs to me. Take only what you brought in, and don't touch anything else." Her nostrils flared slightly. For a second, I thought she might argue. Then she picked up her purse from the floor and walked down the hall toward the bedroom, her footsteps heavy and deliberate on the hardwood floor. I heard the bedroom door shut with a force just short of a slam. Hatch watched me from across the room. "You all right?" he asked. I thought about the question carefully before answering. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me tomorrow morning." He nodded, accepting it as a fair answer. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, rising to head to the kitchen. I sat in my brightly lit house and took a deep breath. I didn't sleep that night. Hatch stayed until past 2 in the morning. When I finally convinced him to head home and get some rest, assuring him I was fine and didn't need anything, he didn't just accept it. He pushed back for a few minutes with a quiet, persistent insistence that was as natural as breathing. Then he studied my face, perhaps seeing enough to put his mind at ease, reached for his jacket, and said, "I'll be back Monday. Call me if anything changes before then." It wasn't a question. I told him I would, and I meant it. I stayed in my chair through the rest of the night and into the early morning. The house grew quiet. Not the suffocating, tense silence of recent months, but a clean, honest quiet. It wasn't until the pressure lifted that I realized how hypervigilant I had been, bracing against an unspoken threat within these four walls. Around 5, I heard Jolene moving around in the back bedroom. Drawers opening and closing, the rustle of packing. I stayed in my chair, finishing the last of the tea Hatch had made before leaving. I watched the sky outside the front window shift from pitch black to gray, then to the pale, fragile blue of a Sunday morning. Warren Stills called at 7:45 a.m. The moment he spoke, I could tell he had listened to my voicemail carefully and understood this wasn't routine business. "Tell me where you are and what you have," he said, skipping pleasantries. "I'm home," I said, "and I have the originals." "Can you see me this morning?" 8:30, I replied. "Come to my office, bring everything." Hatch pulled up at 8 sharp to pick me up. I hadn't asked him to come, but when I stepped out the front door, he was there, his truck idling in the driveway, as if he hadn't driven home 5 hours earlier. I climbed in without a word. Some things between people require no explanation. Warren Stills had practiced law for 37 years, and his face was well trained not to register surprise at anything a client placed before him. But as I laid out the documents, one by one, the power of attorney with the forged signature on page 2, the beneficiary change form, the property appraisal letter, I saw something flicker deep in his eyes. Not shock, but something sharper and very deliberate. "Walk me through each one," he said. I did. He listened without interrupting, making tiny, precise notes on a pad, stopping only to ask specific questions when he needed exact details. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the document spread across his desk for a long moment. "The signature on this power of attorney isn't yours," he stated. "No," I said. "I've handled your signed documents for 20 years, Russ. I know your signature." He pressed his finger against the paper. "This is a convincing attempt, but it's not yours." He set his pen down. "This is forgery, which invalidates the power of attorney and nullifies everything executed under its authority." My hands tightened on my lap. "How fast can we move on this?" "Today," he said. This morning. Right now." He was already reaching for the phone. "First, I'm calling the bank to freeze that joint account. We'll present the documentation, flag the unauthorized beneficiary change, and initiate recovery procedures for any transferred funds." He paused. "How much did he move?" "I don't have the exact number yet. We'll find out," he said, with the calm certainty of a man who had uncovered countless truths over his career. "After the bank, before you leave this office, we are completely rewriting your will." He looked me straight in the eye. "Are you entirely certain about this?" "Without a doubt," I said. He nodded, picked up the receiver, and got to work. I sat across from him, listening as he methodically dismantled everything Caleb and Jolene had spent months building, call by call. Truthfully, there was no joy in it. It was necessary and right, but sitting across from a lawyer watching him undo the damage caused by your own son offers no grand sense of triumph. It felt like surgery, clean, vital, but deeply, quietly painful underneath. We were in that office for 3 hours. By the time we left, the power of attorney was revoked, the joint account frozen, the beneficiary change flagged for cancellation, and my will completely rewritten. Warren's assistant acted as a witness, and a notary was brought in from the adjacent office. Caleb and Jolene's names were scrubbed from every new document. Hatch drove me home, Jolene's car was gone from the driveway. I walked inside. The house had that distinct atmosphere of a space recently cleared out. Not entirely empty, but subtly altered. Leaving traces of reorganization I knew I'd keep discovering over the coming days. I walked down the hall toward the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. The mantelpiece above the fireplace was bare. Of course it was bare. Of course, the brass clock, the wedding photo, the ceramic vase from Quebec City, the little lacquer music box. None of those things were coming back. Jolene leaving didn't change that. Warren's phone calls didn't change that. And Caleb's arrest didn't change that either. That loss existed in a space beyond lawyers, legal papers, and deputies, permanently gone. I stood before the fireplace, and the tears came. They were different from the tears I shed on the mountain road leaning on Hatch's shoulder. These came slow and quiet. The kind of tears a man allows himself only when he is finally in a safe enough place to feel the true weight of what has been taken from him. Not just the objects, but everything they represented. I placed a hand on the mantel and let myself grieve. I wept for Lorraine's things, for the 43 years of life they embodied, for the son I had raised who proved capable of such acts, and for the sheer weight of it all at once. Hatch walked in from the kitchen. He had been brewing coffee while I stood there. I caught the scent before I heard his footsteps. Without a word, he set a mug on the table beside my chair, walked across the room, and sat down opposite me. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say, and he understood that. That quiet understanding was precisely what I needed. After a moment, I sat down and picked up the mug. The coffee was the exact right temperature. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "You'd have done the same for me," Hatch replied. I gave that serious thought. "I'd like to think so," I said. "I know you would," he said with an unarguable firmness, so I accepted it. 6 months is a long time. Long enough for a reconstructed ankle to heal completely. Long enough for a man to walk out his front door on his own 2 feet without second thought. An ability I once feared I'd never take for granted again. Long enough, too, for a court date to be set and resolved. In August, Caleb's case went to court. I'll state plain and simple what happened without flourish. He pleaded guilty to reckless endangerment and abandonment of a vulnerable adult. As part of the plea agreement, the forgery charges were reduced. He received probation, 3 years of supervision, heavy fines, 200 hours of community service, and a court order for full restitution of the funds he had transferred from my account. I didn't attend the hearing. Warren Stills represented me and called afterward to walk me through the outcome. I listened, thanked him, and hung up. Then walked out to the porch and sat in the September afternoon sun with a cup of coffee. I spent a long time reflecting on what justice actually looks like and feels like when you're the person it was meant to serve. I concluded that in reality, it's much smaller than you imagine. Smaller than the version you picture while lying on a dark mountain road, uncertain if anyone will ever come. Real justice consists of paperwork, courtrooms, and phone calls. It isn't a dramatic reckoning, it's a resolution. But it's real, and it holds firm. In the end, that matters far more than its grandiosity. Hatch and I kept our coffee routine strictly intact. Twice a week, Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons, alternating between my kitchen and his. The rhythm settled, the rhythmed in naturally, like a long-standing understanding that simply needed rediscovering. He still called me Russ, and I had called him Hatch for so long I couldn't pin down when it started, or if there was ever a time I didn't. We talked about everything and lingered on nothing too deep. The creek on his land that flooded in July, the small surveying jobs I was considering taking now that my ankle was reliable again, the unpredictable October mountain weather, ordinary conversations that, given enough time, quietly stack up to form a life. We rarely spoke of Caleb. There wasn't much left unsaid, unresolved, or not already set aside in the place where finished things belong. It was a Friday afternoon in late October when I heard the knock. I was in the kitchen boiling water, waiting for Hatch. After 6 months of Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons, I knew his knock intimately. 3 even, deliberate taps without hesitation. This knock wasn't that. It was slower, lighter, the pause between each stroke revealing the state of the person outside. It was the knock of someone uncertain if he had any right to be standing on that porch at all. I walked to the door and opened it. Caleb was standing there. He was thinner than when I last saw him. That night he stood in my living room with Deputy Briggs. The expensive watch on his wrist was gone. He wore a jacket I hadn't seen before, ordinary fabric with worn elbows. Nothing like the carefully chosen attire he used to wear to project the image he so desperately wanted the world to accept. Standing there, he looked like a version of himself I hadn't seen in longer than I could remember. He looked like himself, stripped of the years of greed and calculation. He looked like a boy. His eyes were rimmed with red. He had been crying, or was on the verge of it, exerting immense effort to hold himself together. I could see the heavy toll that effort took on him. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking on that single syllable, strained under heavy weight. I had to come. I had to say it to your face." He swallowed hard, working to steady himself. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't come close to making up for anything. But I needed you to hear it directly from me, not through lawyers, documents, or court proceedings. I needed to stand here and say it to your face." His jaw worked, fighting back emotions threatening to break through. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it." I stood in the doorway and looked at my son. I took my time looking at him. I took in the redness around his eyes, the worn elbows of that unfamiliar jacket, the bare wrist, where a watch used to sit. I looked at his face. Not as I had in the months before that night on the mountain, when I was too busy searching for the son I wished he was to see who he actually was. I looked at him with complete honesty, the kind of gaze you can only have when you stop expecting something to be different than what it is. What I saw was a man who had made a catastrophic mistake and fully understood it. He offered no excuses, made no attempt to minimize it, and didn't try to twist it into a version easier to forgive. He simply stood there carrying the full weight of it. That was new. As far as I knew, it was the first truly genuine thing I had seen from him in years. "I know you're sorry," I said. He looked up at me. "Caleb, I want you to hear this clearly." My voice remained steady, not cold. There's a vital difference between steady and cold, and I wanted him to understand it. "I forgive you. I want you to know that, and I want you to believe it, because I mean it. Not because what you did was small, and not because I've forgotten a single second on that mountain road, but because I'm 71 years old, and I don't have enough years left to carry the weight you dropped on me that night. I forgive you so I can put it down. I'm doing it for myself." I looked him straight in the eye without flinching. "But there's one more thing you need to understand." He gave a subtle nod, the nod of a man who anticipated what was coming and was prepared to accept it. "Forgiveness doesn't reopen a door that's been closed," I said. Those words landed with weight. I watched them sink in, saw his shoulders drop slightly, saw his eyes grow bright with tears, and saw him press his lips tight to endure it. He nodded again. This time a different kind of nod, not bracing for impact, but accepting a hard, honest truth, acknowledging it even as it cost him dearly. "Take care of yourself," I said. And I meant it. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice dropping, very quiet, sounding very young. I looked at him one last second, this person, who had entered the world 42 years ago, weighing 6 pounds, 9 ounces, handed into my arms in a hospital room. Then I took a step back and shut the door. No force, no anger, just closing it, the latch letting out a soft, firm click, the way a door closes when everything on the other side has reached its absolute end. I stood in the hallway, hands resting against the wood. My eyes burned, and my chest was filled with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't purely grief, and it wasn't purely relief, but a quiet space sitting right between the two, carrying a little bit of both. Then, from outside, I heard the sound of Hatch's truck turning into the driveway. A moment later came the knock. I recognized that rhythm right away. 3 measured taps, even and without hesitation. I took a breath in and I let it out. I walked into the kitchen, pulled 2 mugs down from the cabinet, and called out toward the front of the house. "It's unlocked, Hatch." The door opened, and the sound of his boots echoed across the hardwood floor. "Who was that pulling out of the driveway just now?" he asked. "Nobody," I said. "You want it strong today?" "Same as usual," he replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down. I believe this is where the story actually ends. Not with a court sentence, not with a signed document, and not with a door slammed in anger. Just 2 old men, a Friday afternoon in October, and a pot of coffee inside a home that belongs to me, living a life that belongs to me, on a day that is entirely, quietly my own. Even now, sitting here on a quiet Friday afternoon, with a warm cup of coffee in my hands, looking across the table at Hatch, there is one thing I still catch myself thinking about. I let things go far too long. I saw all the signs, the changed locks, the missing mail, those documents, the empty mantelpiece. And yet I kept finding reasons to explain them away. Because accepting the absolute worst about someone you love is one of the hardest things a human being can ever do. So, to anyone watching who sees even a faint shadow of their own life in this story, I want to tell you this straight. Don't wait as long as I did. Don't let love blind you to what someone is actually doing to you. Protect yourself, not out of malice or paranoia, but out of basic self-respect. At the same time, as a man who has never been one to preach about faith, I truly believe that an unseen hand puts the right people on the right path at the exact moment it matters most. I can't find any other explanation that satisfies me for why Hatch was on that mountain road that specific night. Some things are simply grace. This is the kind of story families never talk about out in the open. The real damage was never about the money, the house, or the legal papers. It was about trust, and that is the one thing that never truly comes back. In these situations, the wound goes deeper than any courtroom can ever reach. When truth and accountability finally arrive, it doesn't feel like a grand victory. It just feels like survival. And survival, I have come to realize, is more than enough. It is plenty. If any part of this story resonated with you, or if you have ever been treated like a burden by the very people you gave everything to, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in standing up for what is right, please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. There might be someone out there still looking for their own way through the storm. Subscribe to the channel and stick around. The next story is already lined up. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more to me than you know. Take care. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next one.